Hello everybody, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about the types of trauma responses. So what is a trauma response? When faced with a dangerous or stressful situation, the body floods with hormones that trigger an emotional and physical response. This is referred to as fight or flight, but actually there's more to it than just fight or flight. There are actually 6 types of trauma responses or stress responses. Before I get into the types of trauma responses, let's talk about the science behind fight or flight. When you're faced with a stressful or dangerous situation, your eyes and ears send the information that they're receiving to the amygdala, which is the emotional processing center of the brain. Your amygdala then interprets that information that it's received and sends it to the hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is the command center of the brain, and it communicates with the rest of your body using your nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system then triggers the fight or flight response, which involves releasing adrenaline. You start sweating and shaking, your breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure go up. Your vision and hearing sharpen, etc. There's more to it, but that's a simple explanation for the purpose of this video, based understanding of what happens when your fight or flight response gets triggered. So all of that happens instantaneously, and you don't have any control over what happens. Your brain and your body choose for you what trauma response you will react with. So what are the 6 types of trauma response? There's the well-known fight or flight response. There's also freeze, fawn, flood, and fatigue. The first 2, fight or flight, is the one that you learn about when you're young. Fight is pretty obvious and self-explanatory. It's fighting, lashing out, or being aggressive towards an abuser, a threat, a stressor. This can be physically fighting back or verbally standing up for yourself or someone else. If you're having the fight, stress, or trauma response, there's going to be confrontation. You're not being avoidant in that situation. The second one, flight, is fleeing or running away from a threat. It can involve running from danger, hiding, finding cover, seeking higher ground, and an example of this is walking away from an argument. The third type is freeze. This is when you freeze up and you can't do anything. You might have heard about this one, deer in the headlights, playing dead, feeling paralyzed by fear. This can be paired with or involve dissociation or feeling numb emotionally and physically. You feel like you're unable to move or make a choice. Many survivors of sexual abuse go into the freeze response while the abuse is happening. It's common for people who cope this way to feel a lot of guilt or shame around their trauma response. They feel like they could have fought back or they could have done something to prevent it. They feel guilty for not protecting themselves or running away. But like I said at the beginning of the video, you don't have control over what trauma response you react with. It's something that your brain and your body chooses for you. Freeze is often the response if you feel like you cannot defeat or run away from the threat. Younger children are more likely to freeze than to experience fight or flight. An example of freeze would be a possum that plays dead after being grabbed by a dog. The fourth type of trauma response is fawn, also known as appease. It's an inclination to cooperate or submit oneself to the threat to avoid confrontation or conflict. In other words, people pleasing, agreeing, saying what the abuser wants to hear, or ignoring their own personal wants and needs and desires to do anything and everything possible to avoid the abuse. The fawn response is often developed during childhood trauma when a parent or authority figure is the abuser. The 5th type of trauma response is flood. This is a reaction to stress or trauma where your brain and body are flooded with emotions. It's often used in comedy movies to make light of a situation, for example, a hostage in hysterics. During arguments or conflicts, someone who is emotionally flooded will react rather than respond. Your thought processes are distressed and distorted, which leads to misreading other people's behaviors and finding danger where there is none. Emotional flooding is a common response to neglect or abuse. You learn to pick up on tiny signals that the abuser or abusers give off. Even long after you're out of the abusive situation, your brain has been conditioned to look for the tiny little signals that could mean a situation is going to turn dangerous. An example of the flooding response is your significant other comes home from work, they're really tired, they're not able to be as attentive to you as usual, and you just assume that they don't love you anymore. The 6th type of trauma response is fatigue. The idea is that taking a nap will replenish someone's energy physically and mentally. This allows them to finish or face tasks and manage stress. When someone is faced with a lot of mentally straining tasks, it takes up a lot of glucose in the brain. Taking a nap can help replenish those glucose levels. This response is seen in more high-stress, low-threat situations. This is usually seen in younger people, like babies and children. They get really upset, they have a fit, and then they fall asleep. An example of this in adults is being really scared of flying in airplanes, so you fall asleep during takeoff and you don't wake up until you've already landed. So how do you recognize each type of trauma response? Well, for fight, you have a need for control. You probably have strong self-preservation skills. You might have emotional outbursts. People may describe you as aggressive. You expect perfection in yourself and in others, and you might lash out at other people. You probably find yourself tense a lot and you might grind your teeth. For flight, you have a sense of intense anxiety. You breathe shallowly, you have restless legs or feet, your legs might even be numb. You feel the need to be looking everywhere at once. You feel fidgety, restless, trapped. You tend to go from one activity to the next very, very quickly. You exercise excessively, especially when you are feeling stressed. You stay busy, you like to have tasks to do constantly, and you probably tend to overthink. For freeze, you feel stuck in a part of your body. You dissociate. You feel cold or frozen or numb, and you have pale skin, not related to another medical condition. You feel stiff or heavy. You find yourself holding your breath or restricting your breathing. You feel a sense of dread. You feel your heart pounding in your chest. You struggle to trust others, and you find comfort in solitude. And you probably really don't like making decisions for yourself or for other people. For Fawn, you have difficulty identifying your feelings, and you often look to other people in situations or relationships to figure out how you're supposed to be feeling. You feel like you have no identity. You're constantly trying to please the people in your life, and if someone's angry, your immediate response is to try to appease them and calm them down. You hate conflict. You ignore your own beliefs and thoughts to accept the people's around you. You feel guilt and or anger at yourself most of the time. You struggle to say no. You experience unusual emotional responses with seemingly unrelated reasons, such as sudden outbursts at strangers or feeling sad throughout the day, but nothing happened. At times you feel overwhelmed, but if someone asked you to take on more, you would. You lack boundaries, and you're often taken advantage of in relationships. You feel uncomfortable or even upset when you're asked to give an opinion. For flood, you have emotional outbursts. You frequently feel overwhelmed. You might be quick to cry. You find yourself saying or doing things that you don't really mean. You have a really hard time listening to other people during conflicts. You struggle to maintain personal relationships, and you might catastrophize everything. You project your emotions onto other people. You're scared of rejection, and you might overanalyze or overthink a lot of things. And then finally, for fatigue, you might feel exhausted a lot, especially when you're stressed. And when faced with a stressful situation, you might be the type of person to take a nap or sleep on it before you address the situation. While I was listing how to recognize each of those types, you might have found yourself aligning with multiple of them, and that's fine. No one reacts one single way to every single stress or trauma. You might react in a fight response to one trauma and flood in another, or fawn response to most, but freeze or flight at other times. There is such thing as mixed trauma responses, for example, fight and flight together, or fawn and flood together. Some disorders tend to be associated with certain stress response patterns and types. For example, the fight type is often seen in narcissism. The flight type is common in people who suffer from OCD. The freeze type is seen in a lot of dissociative disorders. And the fawn type is linked with codependency. Obviously, just because you react a certain way in the face of danger doesn't mean that you have one of these disorders, or that if you do have one of the disorders that you can only react in that way. After a traumatic event, people often experience an exaggerated stress response, such as being really jumpy or easily startled. And this is also seen in people who suffer from anxiety. Alright, so that is it for today's video. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe for more videos in the future. If you'd like to follow us on social media, the links will be in the description below. Please leave a comment below if you have any video ideas that you'd like us to make. And with that, goodbye everyone, have a great day, lots of love.